Thank you all and good afternoon. I hope you've all had a really great time at this fantastic conference in a really excellent city. The planners here have done a great job in hosting us again, and we look forward to coming back next time in California in a few years back north in San Francisco. But today I have the pleasure of once again introducing our closing keynote speaker, Ambassador Renée Jones-Bos. But first, I do want to recognize again our sponsors who have generously supported this, our 104th National Planning Conference. So again, I'd like to thank them, and many of you here are associated with these sponsors, so we thank you as well. We are very pleased today to welcome the Ambassador to her second National Planning Conference. I was thinking that since this is our 104th Ambassador, you've now spoken at almost 2% of our conferences. But she first attended the National Planning Conference in New Orleans, where she spoke at the opening plenary, as well as the opening of the Delta Urbanism Symposium. The Ambassador is also a recipient of the APA President's Award, which is given in the second year of a two-year presidency. The Ambassador and the Royal Embassy of the Netherlands have been strong supporters of APA's Delta Urbanism Initiative, and she has facilitated access to Dutch water management experts and has helped shape the future water management strategy for New Orleans. It's the first time any major U.S. city has undertaken such an initiative, and I think we'll all be learning a lot from that initiative that's underway right now. Under the Ambassador's leadership, the Dutch Embassy and the Netherlands government have strengthened the economic ties between the U.S. and the Netherlands. Those economic ties support more than 625,000 jobs in the U.S. Ambassador Jones-Bos has a distinguished public service career that has taken her around the globe. Her appointments have taken her to Moscow, Prague, Bangladesh, and to the United States in 2008, when she was appointed ambassador to the United States. She is the 44th diplomat to represent the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the United States, and the Netherlands' first woman to serve as ambassador in Washington. Soon, the ambassador will return to the Netherlands for her new position as Secretary General of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the highest civil servant position in the ministry. And I'll add one more note. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Ambassador's husband, and the two of them talked about the trip that they had taken in the U.S., and they had decided to take a vacation while in the U.S., and the objective was to visit as many state capitol buildings as they possibly could. And I think they went on from the East Coast through Kansas and to the West Coast and then made their way back. Certainly, they have visited more state capitol buildings than anyone that I have known, and I dare say probably more than anyone in this room. So they're very knowledgeable about our states as well as the national perspective. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome APA's friend and colleague, Ambassador Renée Jones-Bos.
Thank you very much, Paul, for those very kind words of welcome. Actually, we've visited 46 states and 46 capitals, so we're almost there. So I've said to my minister, you have to let us be here a little bit longer still. Well, ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago at APA's New Orleans conference, I was very privileged to join Paul, he just mentioned it, and US Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan, for the middle keynote speech. That was a wonderful experience, and I remember being overawed by a whole room full of so many members of the American Planning Association. When Paul invited me to give this year's closing keynote, I didn't know what to think. I wondered, what did I do to warrant a second invitation? Did I need to redeem myself? Had I not quite lived up to expectations? Or maybe Paul is getting forgetful. But I've come to a different conclusion. The Dutch are good at planning, design, and climate adaptation. But we are told that the tallest blade of grass gets mowed down first. So I guess Paul invited me back to show me how good Americans are at planning and design, at adaptation, at new urban and green strategies. Paul and Mitch, it worked. I'm very impressed with what I've seen and heard here. I have to say it's a truly amazing conference. And I think all of us here, all of the team at the embassy and from the Netherlands have learned a lot. So thank you for giving us that second chance. During my time in the US, I've seen many seeds grow into large trees. But one of the best things that we as an embassy have done has been to nourish and support the blossoming APA-Dutch partnership. This partnership had an odd beginning, with Paul traipsing around the Netherlands in cold, damp December days, seeing our water planning and landscape practices. But out of that very cold visit grew warm things between the Dutch and the APA, including the Delta Urbanism Symposium in New Orleans, Boston, and LA. Delta Urbanism was funded primarily by the Lincoln Land Institute. And it was the sweat and dedication of APA staff that made it happen. John Reinhardt, if you're in the room, thank you. Jen Grave, Carolyn Torma, you've done an amazing job. So, why are we here today? My Dutch colleagues and I wanted to use this week to share, learn, make new friends and new partnerships. This is important because coastal and delta cities have a challenging future and new adaptation practices are urgently needed. This afternoon, in the next 40 minutes or so, I wanted to talk to you about a few things. First of all, about how floods shaped our history. Second, about how cost-benefit analysis underpins our policies and have produced a paradigm shift. Third, about some projects demonstrating that new paradigm. And last, about our partnership with the APA and how the new paradigm has found its way to the American shores, in particular in New Orleans. And David Wagoner, David, you talked a little bit about this before in one of the workshops. So 2 years ago, I left the APA audience with a clear message about my country. Sophisticated, integrated water management is the sine qua non of keeping the Dutch feet dry. To be Dutch means that you must live with water, whether you like it or not, and water management is part of Dutch DNA. So let me expand a little. In the Netherlands, we've had our share of civil wars, uprisings against foreign occupiers, a golden age, a wind trade in tulip bulbs, Napoleon, a brutal occupation during World War II. And my American friends are quick to remind me of a high point in Dutch history, and this is when we traded New Amsterdam, today's Manhattan, New York, for Suriname. Although with the head of the British Planning Association here, I have to say that the trade was not altogether voluntary, and I think some cannons came into play as well. But it should surprise no one that the true cadence of Dutch history is best defined by floods and our response to them. We can go back more than 1,000 years. The North Sea flooded in 1099. We had the All Saints floods of 1170, the St. Elizabeth flood in 1421, the Haarlem Lake flood in 1836, the Zuiderzee flood of 1916, and the Zeeland floods of 1943. And much more recently, in the 1990s, we had major river flooding in the Netherlands. We have in fact averaged 2 major floods each century over the last millennium. Geography is destiny, as they say. These floods claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. They forever changed our landscape, and they left a potent legacy in the Dutch DNA. Strengthen the dikes, fight the water, manipulate the landscape. The saying that while God created the earth, the Dutch created the Netherlands has more than a kernel of truth in it. Another part of Dutch DNA is found at the entrance to the old port of Amsterdam, close to the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. And it says, de kost gaat voor de baat uit. And for those of you who don't understand Dutch, that means the cost comes before the benefit. The cost comes before the benefit. That golden age motto and our modern approach to water management are, oddly enough, in alignment, whether in planning, in economic and environmental and resiliency perspectives. Let me explain. Our geographical destiny has made the Dutch known for many things. We have an entrepreneurial spirit. That's why we came to this continent 400 years ago. We're penny pinchers. That's why the Dutch bankers are still very good at what they do. We're world traders. We're Calvinist preachers, with at the same time an open mind. Someone once described our collective personality as one of sober optimism. We find ways to make lemonade out of lemons, to adapt and even stand those disasters on their heads, to make the best of it. It was this mentality that enabled us to rebuild and see new opportunities after every major flood. Even after the All Saints flood swept away our peaty northern coast, Amsterdam was able to grow into the commercial hub between St. Petersburg and London, between the Mediterranean and the Baltic. When river floods swept through our delta and major rivers, we placed our rivers between dikes and created productive farmland. And the gateway to Europe's northern kingdoms now went through Holland. In 1836, the huge inland Haarlem Lake jumped its banks, killing thousands. We drained that lake and then built houses on it and created Schiphol Airport. Some of you may have been there. And that literally means the ship's hole. Today, one of Europe's largest airport, more than 4 meters, 12 feet below sea level, close to the Dutch tulip and flower industry. And in Rotterdam, 3 centuries of repeated floods forced us to create better protection for the port and its workers. And today, Rotterdam is Europe's largest port, and it's the lifeblood of the Dutch economy. So our forefathers had a choice: to invest in the future, to put the cost before the benefit, or to ignore the past. Without public investment, engineering, and innovation, the Dutch would not now be living in the Netherlands. We'd probably all be living in Germany or Belgium. And who knows what that would have done to those countries. We did that by cobbling together coalitions of the various provinces and states to support such investment. These coalitions could only be swayed by strong arguments and good cost-benefit data. And because the cost-benefit analysis was quite clear, those investments were made. And the benefits, today the Netherlands, on that small piece of land, is the world's 17th largest economy. It's the 7th largest trading nation. We are the 3rd largest investor in the US, by the way, and we are the 3rd most densely populated country in the world. We derive tremendous opportunity from being the gateway to Europe. Not bad for a land of swampy marsh, gloomy weather, and stingy preachers. So let me now move to how our response to floods has changed over the last 50 years or so. 1953 marked our last major flood, just as we were emerging from the long shadows of the Second World War. Still poor, still struggling, we invested $40 billion in a massive coastal flood protection system known as the Delta Works. The Delta Works protect our entire delta and the areas around Rotterdam. It has repeatedly prevented nuisance and costly localized flooding. It also has prevented major floods. On those terms alone, it was a wise investment. The main barrier of the Delta Works was designed to permit dynamic salt-fresh water exchange. This was not a flood protection goal, but an environmental and an economic one. The dynamic design doubled the barrier's cost. Were those additional costs justified? Instead of having degraded, compromised back swamp waters, our delta now has a vibrant local fishing industry, robust regional tourism, and abundant recreation, and an ecosystem whose future health is guaranteed. The marginal cost of the dynamic design have surely returned their investment. International trade and the Port of Rotterdam are the lifeblood of the Dutch economy. Without protection, Rotterdam is at the mercy of North Sea storms. A major flood that closed the port would cripple the Dutch economy, most likely for years. Belgian, German and Danish competitors would permanently steal away our logistics and shipping industries. So the massive storm surge barrier that protects Rotterdam is also flexible. It keeps the port open to commerce, yet it is closed to protect life and property when a big coastal storm threatens. Making the barrier flexible was an added cost, but keeping the port open is crucial. So we think the flexible solution was a smart investment. So let me say a little bit about cost benefits and our move towards a new paradigm. The Netherlands in the 21st century faces new challenges. Sea levels are rising, coastal storms will become more extreme, there's erosion, increased river discharge, more rain, periodic droughts, salt intrusion, subsidence, and the many challenges of occupying a dynamic landscape. Our old higher dikes approach is no longer sustainable or affordable. We are learning to adapt, to live with water and not always fight it. So our collective DNA is mutating. It's mutating away from flood resistance at any cost to flood accommodation wherever possible. This means that today we are looking at a new paradigm in our cost-benefit analysis. Let me step back here away from geography and past projects and into the realm of public finance, of costs and of benefits, and how climate change is nuancing traditional cost-benefit analysis. Economics is a dismal science, so I'll try to make this painless. Since the early 1990s, the Netherlands has applied cost-benefit analysis to infrastructure and planning decisions. We know that these analyses are imperfect, and we know with certainty that politicians, maybe even Dutch politicians, although of course I'd hesitate to say so, don't always make rational decisions, even if they have perfect information. But that's a different keynote speech, and I'll do that, Paul, after I retire. I promise you I'll be back. We ask, do the costs of increasing flood safety exceed the benefits of reduced flood damages? On the cost side of the equation, we look at fixed and variable investment aspect of a project, and operations and maintenance. On the benefits side, we estimate the value of reduced flood damages to roads, buildings, and infrastructure. We estimate the economic benefits floods might produce, for instance, the additional wages and materials production needed to rebuild after a flood. These types of valuations are traditional and pretty easy, if you're an economist, that is. Where it gets tricky, but crucial, is in the assessment of indirect flood damages, like lower economic activity, business interruption, flood-related environmental damage, pollution, the damage to unique fauna, flora, buildings, and cultural assets. Valuing the loss of life is even more difficult, and I know economists would say this in a way, it is even more difficult. I personally would say valuing the loss of life is impossible. No international consensus exists on how to precisely quantify these indirect damages. Many assumptions are made. Are assessments imperfect? Yes. But we are trying, because by capturing these values, better investment decisions can be made and better policies designed. If you've seen the Dutch landscape and understand our risks, you might wonder why our dikes are not higher, our rivers not more contained, our buildings not more elevated. The primary reason, cost-benefit analysis says we can't afford it because those very actions might increase the impacts of a catastrophic event. This is a change in mentality driven by recent events which show us that low probability, high impact disasters are still too common. And another reason, because we don't want to live in an overly engineered landscape that has lost its aesthetic charm. We like our modern cities, but we also like our deep green polders, our Amsterdam Canal, our low skies and distant horizons. And that is why a new paradigm called living with water infuses our policy and our public investments today. Of course, we must always be on guard against floods. That cannot and will not change. The new paradigm means, however, that we can't always fight the water. Instead, we need to accommodate water and give it room. And in the world's third most densely populated country, giving room to water means taking space from something else. Now you would say that seems like a zero-sum game. Or is it? Climate change, oddly enough, is reminding us of both the beauty and resiliency of nature and the benefits of sustainable design. The sober optimist is again making lemonade out of lemons. Let me give you a few examples. You will see that the new paradigm extends into many fields and disciplines. And my first example would be the program that I just mentioned, Room for the River. Our Room for the River program, a 3.1 billion project-driven investment, which started in 2007 and will be completed by 2015. The projects are restoring resiliency, and I quote, natural and beneficial functions, unquote, to our river floodplains. The Room for the River project has two explicit and equal goals: improving floodplain functions and increasing the area's spatial quality. One of these projects is in Nijmegen, a city of almost 200,000 along the Rhine River. The river channel near Nijmegen narrows drastically, from 1 mile wide to less than a third of a mile wide. When the snow melts in the Alps or it rains heavily in Germany, water stacks up just above the city, threatening life and property. A river bypass is the obvious option, but that option would mean takings, land acquisition, increased infrastructure cost. It would not improve the area's spatial quality. It would place citizens on a fortress surrounded by a raging river. The bypass, the less costly option, was therefore rejected. Instead, the project will set back the river dike, creating a new water channel, new high-value waterfront living opportunities, new parkland. The project's cost, $400 million. But its benefits are many. Additional economic activity from new retail, residential and commercial opportunities, environmentalists get new parkland, water managers get lower flood risks, shippers get more reliable navigation. Local government has new, high-value riverfront land. So the dike setback option was more costly than the bypass option, but its benefits far exceed the additional cost. Further west in the river delta, we are notching levees to create a wide, high water channel that will purposely flood farmland. The Noordwaardpolder project, at 11,000 square acres, will reduce water levels and flood risk in nearby cities of Gorinchem and Dordrecht. It will restore a previously diked wetlands to its natural state, improve ecosystem connectivity in a nearby national park, and broaden a major European migratory bird flyway. It provides lower flood risk to citizens in nearby cities and recreates a resilient landscape that disappeared almost 200 years ago. A second example of the new paradigm can be found in Amsterdam, where the past is prologue. Amsterdam is a great city. Some of you may know it. Lively, cultural, walkable, controversial, but it's also watery and beautiful, and it has a shortage of homes. A new development just east of the city is rising from the bottom of Lake Ey that will house 45,000 people in 18,000 residences and will provide jobs for 12,000 people. Land uses are mixed, and dwellings, while dense, are spread across 6 man-made islands. Public transport is close by. New urban architecture is embedded. Recreation, parkland and water storage areas abound. The original Amsterdam floating home, which was a converted barge anchored in an old Amsterdam canal, is being replaced by a climate-ready version. The navigable canal and waterfront living, so prevalent in historic Amsterdam, infuses also the spirit and the reality of this new area. And the entire area is elevated well above water level. The costs of Eiburg were substantial. The benefits even more so. This is a great example of a Dutch saying, it's not either or, but it can be and. You can have both if you try. A third example is in Rotterdam, which is as different from Amsterdam as Los Angeles is from San Francisco. Rotterdam sees climate change as a mixed blessing, as a threat and an opportunity. Climate change means water variability will increase from 4 directions: stormwater from above, groundwater from below, rising sea levels from the west, and more river discharge from the east. Raising the dikes is not an option. Additionally, as the old inner port is abandoned for newer, larger facilities closer to the sea, urban renewal needs and opportunities abound. Making new communities flood resilient is giving rise to an entire new school of water-based design. Parking garages and skate parks are storing water. Old, long-buried canals are being reopened. Water taxis and water bikes are connecting neighborhoods. Green roofs and household stormwater collection systems are commonplace. All of this and a climate neutral by 2030 goal is actively supported by the city government. My last 2 examples from the logistics and the research realms show the reach of the new paradigm. At Maasvlakte 2, where Rotterdam's port is growing through a major $4 billion expansion into the sea, we are showing that economic development or economic Darwinism can also be resilient. More than 8 square miles of deep sea port is being created to triple the port's container handling capacity. This investment is crucial for the Dutch economy. But those investments are made with climate goals in mind. Responsible dredging practices are required for 13 billion cubic feet of sand necessary for the expansion. Sand reuse has the highest priority. To mitigate the sand mining impacts, seabed eco-reservations are being created. Dunes are being enlarged, and 20% of the project is set aside for nature and recreation. 2,500 workers for the project reside nearby in residences made from recycled shipping containers. A clean coal plant has been built for the site, making electric generation incredibly efficient. And close by, depleted oil fields will be used as a massive pilot project to test seabed CO2 storage. Are these environmental features costly? Yes, they are. Are they wise? We think so. Are they beneficial? No doubt about it. So my final example is about a research project called the Sand Engine. Every year, we must stabilize our coastline by adding 12 million cubic meters of sand to our foreshore. Sea level rise scenarios suggest a doubling, tripling, or quadrupling of annual sand additions to maintain our shoreline. We're lucky to have large volumes of sand nearby and innovative, cost-effective Dutch dredgers to do the job. Our Building with Nature program seeks to harness nature's dynamic forces for public benefit. And how do we do that? 21 million cubic meters of sand, double our annual amount, and occupying about 1 square mile, has been placed in a big pile along the Dutch coast. Over time, nature's engine, wind, water, and waves will distribute the sand along the coast. Some of the sand will find its ways into the dunes, increasing their strength and environmental attractiveness. Some of the sand will settle on the foreshore, providing immediate flood protection benefit. And some of the sand will make its way northward along our coast. This $70 million sand engine project is expected to make nearby sand supplementation unnecessary for the next 20 years. It will save tens of millions of dollars. This big sandbox will be open for recreation and teaching and accessible to people, plants, and sea mammals. As the sand dissipates, the Dutch will learn to maximize the sand engine's applicability to other parts of the Dutch coast and maybe to other coastal areas around the globe. So having talked about the shift in paradigm, I want to return back to the realm of economics and science just for a moment, also because of its relation to the cost come before the benefit idea. I noted that the new paradigm is reminding us of the beauty and benefits of natural systems. The sand engine demonstrates that the benefits of the natural system are real. In our Building with Nature program, of which the sand engine is but one part, we are learning to harness nature's energy to improve our lives. And we are trying to better understand the economic value of what is known as ecosystem services. Ecosystem goods and services are the things from nature we need and use. Clean air, water, food. They are produced by natural capital, trees, mountains, oceans, rivers, and yield beneficial processes like flowing water, nutrient cycling. They provide habitat, food, water storage, and generate thousands of services. We know that these services and functions have value. The economists have a difficult time quantifying these values in ways that will improve cost-benefit analysis. And if our public investment strategies must yield certain benefits, capturing the value of these ecosystem services could substantially improve project design and, in turn, our return on investment. Let me try to explain this in simple terms. A neighborhood with many trees and a clean pond should have higher value than a neighborhood without these goods. A house on the beach should have higher values than houses 3 blocks away. It is easy to look at house prices and see the value of being beachfront or pondside. But we aren't very good at quantifying the value of the ecosystem services created for individual properties or neighborhoods because of the ocean, pond, or trees. We know those values are there. We know they are important and not inconsequential. And if we learn to quantify their value with more precision, our investment decisions will lead to a better appreciation of our natural capital. A byproduct of our new paradigm is more research into this quantification. Fantastic work is also being done on this topic here in the western US, on the West Coast. Perhaps a small but true anecdote will help. A Swiss landscape architect had worked in the Napa Valley and in France's Rhone Valley, restoring the riverbeds, native plants and species, and creating more water natural storage. He loved his work. He said, the charm of the riverbed was improved as its function was improved. But now I quote him, he also said, it's the damnedest thing. Everyone agrees with me, and we can all see it, and we can all sense it, but no one can tell me how much this charm is worth. So a last thing I wanted to mention deals with science and is also linked to better cost before benefits. Now I'm talking about tipping points. Hurricane Katrina showed us that the variability and intensity of climate impacts are large, unpredictable, and possibly catastrophic. The consequences of a changing climate demand that we understand climate variability and climate intensity. That understanding may lead to different policy choices. Investments are always more effective when they are proactive and preventive. And thus knowing when to start changing is an important piece of the puzzle. Dutch scientists are using adaptation tipping points to help us. An adaptation tipping point is the point at which a water management strategy can no longer meet its objectives. At that point, the strategy is insufficient and likely to fail. Tipping points shows us also that the forces making failure likely are self-sustaining, that they are not one-off cyclical events. Now, reaching a tipping point does not mean that water management is impossible, or that the consequence of passing a point will immediately be catastrophic. Instead, tipping points help us understand how much climate change, how much sea level rise, how much weather intensity the current management regime can absorb. After all, if the costs come before the benefits, a crucial question is which costs, at what place, precisely when. So, I have talked about our flood-shaped history, about the cost before the benefit approach, and about our changing paradigm, the adjustment in our DNA. I now want to wrap up by talking about the relevance for you here in the United States, about our partnerships. And let me do that by addressing a threat, an opportunity, and an inspiration. The threat, first of all, is captured by the Surging Seas report issued last month, which draws a few stark conclusions for the United States. One is that sea level rise along the US coasts will double the frequency of 1 to 100-year storms. The takeaway of that? More regular flooding and more flood impacts. 5 million people live in areas that will be below the normal high tide line if the seas rise as projected. Millions more live in areas just beyond the projected high tide line. Those areas will be flooded with storm surge. Florida and Louisiana are most at risk, but New York, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, and North Carolina are vulnerable too. They say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. I'm not happy that those places are becoming more like the Netherlands. But as the Dutch ambassador to the United States, I do see a golden opportunity, and this brings me to the opportunity. More things for the Netherlands and the United States to share, more joint learning, more research partnerships, and more reasons to travel to New York, New Orleans, and Miami, and for you to come to Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Zeeland. But most of all, I see an inspiration. The Dutch Calvinist in us demands that we do the right thing. That means to accept things as they are, prepare to make things better, work hard, do right by your neighbor, and be thankful. And Paul Farmer of the APA, David Wagoner from New Orleans, and Dale Morris from our embassy in Washington, D.C., started down a path that embodies that inspiration. They started the Dutch Dialogues to show how New Orleans could be safer, more attractive, more resilient, if it took and applied living with water ideas and practices to its urban areas. Over the last year, a comprehensive, integrated water management strategy for New Orleans, funded by the Louisiana state government and HUD, is being developed by a Calvinist Cajun team. Now that's a new combination for you. The Dutch-American team is designing a new future for one of America's most unique and beautiful cities. Neighborhoods and community blocks will get water assignments. Covered, buried, ugly, and constricted drainage systems will be opened, restored, made functional and attractive. A circulating water system will yield a healthy, flood-resilient ecosystem. That same system will store more stormwater and decrease the area's flood risk. Crucial, iconic water bodies like the Bayou St. John and the Carondelet Canal can be restored to their past glories and serve their historic purposes. conveyance, linkage, and water storage. Tweaking their designs and functions can add new amenity to these corridors of significance and to the neighborhoods surrounding them. A more imaginative, multi-purpose use of drainage can enhance water quality, filter pollution, and provide places for recreation and reflection, creating better economic opportunity and better flood safety for those living nearby. And abandoned properties can be redesigned to provide new, innovative water storage assets that also improve community functions and community values. What the water management strategy for New Orleans demonstrates is that engineering alone is not a sufficient response to complex landscape challenges. Planning and design and function and form must also inform investment decisions, and that if you do this wisely, you weigh and value all costs and all potential benefits. The flood protection and other community needs in New Orleans, in the Netherlands today, and in the US coastal communities of tomorrow demand this broader approach. In the Netherlands and in New Orleans, businessmen, activists, politicians, stakeholders, other leaders are learning that only by comprehensively defining the problem can we design an optimal solution, so that when you invest, maximum benefits will follow. But I think you planners in here knew that already. So finally, let me say this. Han Meijer, a distinguished member of the faculty of the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands and a full professor of urban design, was intimately involved in Dutch dialogues and in the New Orleans water management strategy. He was also inspired, and he said, and I quote him, "What's happening in New Orleans is breathtaking. Never before have I seen a water strategy develop so organically. The complexity of the task is overwhelming, maybe impossible. But the passion of the participants is inspiring, maybe because the need is so high. And if they are successful in New Orleans, they will have done something that even we in the Netherlands have not yet been able to do. Combine urban function, form, and need into a strategy for resilience, a respect for nature and for the place where you live, and a clear path to guaranteeing New Orleans' future," unquote. And that, my friends, is very high praise indeed, certainly for a Calvinist Dutchman. Success there is a direct, intentional product of the Dutch partnership with New Orleans, with committed local planners, with a vision of concerned citizens and architects like David Wagoner, the warm friendship out of that cold December visit with Paul Farmer and the APA leadership, and the professional drive of the staff and members of the American Planning Association. And may I add, I think also the drive and professionalism of my colleagues and my friends at the Dutch Embassy and at the consulate here on the West Coast. So that, I think, is a truly inspiring story, and I hope it will be a continuation and a true inspiration from all of us. Thank you for working with us. Thank you for a wonderful conference, and thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. Thank you.